This is the Black Information Network Daily Podcast, and I'm your host, Ramses Ja. And sometimes the amount of stories that make their way to us means that we simply can't cover everything that comes our way. But from time to time, a story just stays with me, and I feel compelled to share it with you and give you my thoughts. And now, one more thing.
I got one more thing I'd like to talk to you about right now.
Okay, if you're like me, Florida is, I can't even say it's a gift and a curse. I want to say that because, Florida continuously provides content. And when you're a content creator and you work in the media space, content really works, and it helps you to do your job. But this type of content is so heartbreaking and so gut-wrenching that I hesitate to really broach the topic because I don't want my emotions to overwhelm me. I don't want to get frustrated. I want to think linearly and strategically because I recognize that there's a full frontal assault on Blackness, let's be honest, in Florida. And so I've been champing at the bit and biding my time to wait for a very special guest to make her way back down my street to where we could have some conversations about some of the goings on in Florida. Most recently, the Black professor a former professor, I should say, who is among the group that drafted Florida's new teaching directives and agenda. And this is a topic that obviously we need to discuss in this space and in every other space for that matter. But I'm very, very happy to be joined by my guest and my frequent guest, hopefully to be frequent again moving forward, Dr. Camilla Westenberg. For those that are not yet familiar with her, she is Professor Emeritus of Phoenix College, and she serves as the second vice president for political action of the Maricopa County branch of the NAACP and an educator for nearly 40 years. So welcome back to the show.
It's good to be home.
Oh, yeah. Now, for our listeners, allow me to paint a little bit of a picture here. And we are just going to have this conversation. I know it's been a long time building up to this point, but I'm going to read a bit from the griot to bring you up to speed. All right. A conservative retired Black professor named William Barclay Allen is a prominent member of the group that drafted Florida's new perplexing teaching directives, which address how slavery might have given enslaved people valuable skills. All right, I'm going to stop there because we're going to go through this line by line. I know how that might feel, but what are your initial thoughts when I say that they're teaching these children that slavery gave Black people valuable skills?
Well, as an African American who did not experience slavery, but I had a grandmother and grandfather who were close to it. And so I know what their experience was. And this is growing up in Arkansas. And it's interesting because they reference his reference to the Little Rock Nine and how the policemen, there is a good side and a bad side. There were policemen that kept them from going into the school, and there were policemen that kept them.
I read about that.
To go into the school.
Yeah.
The fact is that never should have been the case in the first place where they were being kept from going to school. And as way leads on to way, you're never really sure who is around you when that has occurred.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a person in uniform that comes to you, just like today, you don't know if it's a good cop or a bad cop that's in your midst.
Right.
And so there is always this innate harboring of discontent, uncertainty, and fear that is a part of everything that you do.
Okay.
I know I grew up in a completely Black environment.
Mm-hmm.
Education, church, but all of the restrictions were placed on me. There wasn't anything good about it because as a little girl, I was wondering, why couldn't I drink from a water fountain? I was wondering, why did I have to take my grandmother or grandfather to the back, to the colored waiting room? As a matter of fact, one time I ripped the sign off the wall because I was so angry. And this is young. This is young because you know that you are a human being. So there isn't any good in it at all when you have segregation.
Sure.
Because it causes you to feel that you are an other, that you are not accepted, that you are not up to par, that you are inferior. And so there isn't anything that comes out of it because always innately in you is this feeling of who is in my midst after certain horrible things have been done, like the Ku Klux Klan coming through, and you're hearing about it at night with their sheets, are driving from Arkansas through Mississippi, and you know you have to go very fast because you don't want to get stopped.
And you don't want to be there
right?
When the
you
sun
don't want
goes
to
down.
be there. And even back then in the day, if you were a young man driving, you had to be careful. It wasn't just today. It has always been the case. And so there isn't anything that comes that is positive that comes out of oppression.
And that's something that I believe a lot of people feel is very true. When I first read the headline that Black people benefited from slavery and got useful skills, to me, I felt like there's a lot of assumptions and a lot of arrogance in a statement like that. In other words, Black people needed to come here and endure slavery to learn skills, when I know that in Africa, these skills originated in most instances.
When perhaps some of those who are sitting around and just looking didn't have the skills to do it themselves, so they were inferior. Okay, let's keep it real.
Go ahead and
they
say
were
that.
lazy.
Go ahead and
say
that.
They were lazy.
Let me add to that. For people that have felt like there is a religious component to this, that Black people benefited from slavery because of the religion that they were able to leave slavery with. Well, the fact of the matter is that Christianity was practiced in Africa as well. Long before slavery existed, thousands of years, in fact, before slavery existed in the continental United States. And so there's an arrogance that shrouds a sentiment like this. It reeks of entitlement. And at least in my opinion, it is exceptionally revisionist. And it only serves to insulate the perpetrators from the real world consequences of the act of enslaving a group of people delineated only by race and subjecting them to what many people would agree is the harshest form of slavery, chattel slavery. You don't have your name, you don't get your children are born as your property through and through. And to say that Black people benefited because of they emerged with some skills is a pathetic attempt at trying to create a sort of silver lining. Pathetic. I would add to it that also for folks that really feel like this is the narrative that we must lean into in order to make sure that nobody feels, no children, I should say, feel bad about the fact that this country was built on slave labor, that specific type of slave labor. I feel like there's a problem with folks who aren't too far left, too far right, folks in the middle, just kind of accepting what they're being fed. And there's like a degree of apathy where it's like, oh, well, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, or something along the lines of, well, that was a million years ago. It doesn't matter anymore. And, you know, for those of us in the know who've done all of the research from, you know, the Black codes and Jim Crow, up to, you know, the early 1900s where, you know, we're talking about, you know, the GI Bill not being given to Black soldiers. And of course, after that, redlining, and then later on the war on drugs, and, you know, the story where wealth was robbed over and over again. We're just talking about, like the bigger things that there's more textbook, not about the 90% of Black land ownership that has been robbed from Black people over the last, let's call it 100+ years. When you look at our current circumstances, for people to completely remove our past or revise our past in such a way that it allows folks in that middle space to say, listen, man, we're all born, slavery was a long time ago. You know, it gives that narrative space to grow, it gives it oxygen, if you will. And so that was my initial thought.
I guess, you know, my thought too is if that cohort of people who are saying that education should be changed, and there are two sides to the story, diluting it and reframing it. I asked, what was Jesus? What was his hue? And did he have woolly hair? You know?
Oh, yeah, I know.
Did he have woolly hair? Yeah. And so when you look at the depiction that you see today, that has been done historically. That isn't anything new, where things have been changed and they have created the image that they want to create for you to accept the position that they have. There were a couple of things, Ramses, that I wanted to say about this business with the school boards. I went back and I researched William Barley Allen because I wanted to know a little bit about his history.
Okay.
And just he historically has been conservative.
Oh, yeah.
He historically has been placed in positions in education by conservative leaders. And so that isn't atypical either. We're talking about that right now with the Supreme Court.
Yeah, Clarence Thomas. Oh, yeah.
Hey. And individuals who will do your bidding for you because they look different. And so you use them
to provide a veneer of...
Right. And some people buy into it.
Sure.
We have to be very, very careful of that. It disturbs me that it is occurring, and I don't know why, other than it's for clout or wealth, and some benefits that they are receiving that allow them to think that they are better or that they are there, whereas the people are going to turn right around when they get where they want to go and push them down too.
Sure.
They're not ultimately going to be accepted. And it all comes down to looking at truth. And I want to deal with it from two perspectives that recently I personally have been dealing with it. And I'm going to reference some organizations, but I'm speaking as me. So that's the hat that I'm wearing.
Okay.
I just attended the 114th National NAACP Convention in Boston. And as a delegate, part of our agenda has that we must be a part of the resolution committee and to work on the resolutions for the year. Where is overarching the NAACP going to go?
All right.
And the second aspect of the resolution under civil rights is, and I want to read this.
Okay.
Because in Florida, Santos has been talking about woke, and he's bastardized it, and he's turned it into a negative to be woke. The NAACP says reclaiming the word woke as part of African American culture. Whereas Black history is a critical aspect of American history and has shaped American culture, including the evolution of language. And whereas the word wake up and woke have served as a call to action as conveyed by social activist Marvin Garvey, who stated, "Wake up, Ethiopia, wake up, Africa." And the Negro mine workers who in 1940 issued the statement, "We were asleep, but we will stay woke from now on," in advocating for discriminatory pay. And whereas the term woke was first highlighted in the 1962 essay, "If You Woke, You Dig It," featured in the New York Times by Harlem-based writer William Melvin Kelly, who documented the cultural appropriation and distortion of language, resulting in certain idioms being abandoned by their original Black creators. And whereas the term woke has been similarly misused, as traditionally and white-focused media have reframed woke as trendy new slang, eroding its cultural connection and separating the term from its historical grounding in social justice. And whereas 6 decades later, anti-Black racists have engaged in a similar exercise of cultural appropriation to weaponize and misdefine the word woke, as evidenced by Stop Woke Act, specifically targeting the teaching of American history and Black educators. And whereas Black educators are more likely to teach subjects that incorporate an inclusive view of history, and legislation like the Stop Woke Act threatens the free speech and livelihood of teachers and the quality of education received by all students, most recently students in Florida. Therefore, be it resolved that the NAACP affirms the term woke and its historical connection to Black history, Black liberation movements, and social justice. Be it further resolved that the NAACP, through its units, encourages a historically accurate and correct use of the term woke when its misuse is identified. Be it finally resolved that the NAACP condemns cultural appropriation, misuse of Black idioms, and specific efforts by anti-Black racists to distort and redefine the specific term woke. I am woke.
AF. And you know something? First off, I'm so glad you shared that. I felt like that was a breath of fresh air that I needed. And for the NAACP to take that position out loud with their whole chest, saying it with their whole chest, that, I believe that energy is necessary right now. To be honest with you, I've always kind of felt that way, because the attack on the term woke or wokeness or anything that would fall under that umbrella, it always felt, to me, it felt like just bona fide racism. That's just what it was to me. The things that Black people have been pushing for have made sense. So much so that they even benefit the majority of white people too. the policies. And, I can't say that everybody is always right, but generally the stuff where there's the most momentum, it benefits everyone. But there's this idea or this narrative that white folks will lose something. And so because of that and because of that fear, it's almost like white people are asking for us to switch place, or rather white people think black people are asking to switch places. And they don't hear the term equitable. And they don't even hear the term equal. They feel like it's like we're coming for some of these folks who are in the middle that don't really involve themselves in these issues. They just feel like it's just too much. With that in mind, I can't for the life of me figure out how this ended up being the case, that woke was a bad thing. In other words, if you look at the opposite of the word woke, to me, that's sleep. Yeah, right. You know what I mean? And so the idea there is that they prefer to be sleep than woke. And that just doesn't, and it just goes to show how apathetic or how much distance and insulation folks can put between themselves and black issues, because they would willingly adopt the position of being sleep when woke is the alternative.
Exactly,
you know
exactly.
I mean? And so,
well, one of the things, and with Santos, and of course he's competing against the Trumpster. One of the things I remember when Trump came down the escalator and he said he was going to clean the swamp. And I said he did. He took it to the sewer. But I mean, really, that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah.
But I do believe that what has happened to the general public and to those individuals who are conservative and are not necessarily really affirmative action based, if you will. When you hear something, and I equate this to my love of hip hop culture and rap, when you hear something over and over and over again, sometimes it becomes a part of you, innately a part of you.
Sure.
I know that when Trump or Santos, as he is doing in his campaign, talking about being woke and how negative it is, if you have a group of people who are aligned with you on a number of issues and you are speaking about it negatively, innately, it becomes a part of you. I said that because when I'm in my car and I have my radio on and I'm listening to music, now the lyrics are not necessarily saying everything that I agree with. The words are not necessarily saying everything that's a part of my being, my actual being.
Sure.
But I'm driving down the road singing the songs because those words I have heard over and over again. The beat is going, the rhythm is going, you're into it. So it has become innately a part of me.
Yeah. And
in some ways I have accepted it and I enjoy it. Although it may be proposing something that I'm saying, oh, that's not such a good idea. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It may be a negative concept of women, or it may be highlighting drugs, but here I am driving down the road singing it. So we have to understand what the impact is of repetition. And both of those individuals, especially Trump, he is savvy with that. He's a media person. He is a media person, and he knows how to use it. So people are hearing these negative connotations and concepts, and Santos is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And, I was listening to this, and he was going anti-woke, this wokeness. I mean, it was all negative.
Yeah,
and so suddenly, the same thing with critical race theory. And no one knew what critical race theory was.
But they were scared of it.
Yeah. Because some people had taken it and decided we're going to make a monster out of it. Yeah. And suddenly it becomes this huge monster. And the question is, how do we bring the monster back? Or some people are saying, is it possible to bring the monster back? With all of these thoughts that we're talking about right now, people are saying we're approaching a civil war with the political dynamics and everything that's going on, that there may be something that will occur. And not only, it may not be as a group, it can just be a snapper. One person that will go on and do a major attack on someone that will have an impact. So the seed has been planted.
Sure.
In our communities, in our government. It has been planted. And the other thing I want to say before I forget, one other organization that I am affiliated with, my sorority, and I chair the Advocate for Social Justice Committee.
Mm-hmm.
We are about the business, and I would say for everyone in your own community, get involved with your school board.
Mm.
Decisions are being made if you are not there. And before you know it, they will have voted on it. And there isn't anything that you can do about it. But you need to be there to just nip it right in the bud as those decisions are being made. And what we are hoping that we can do, I don't know, we want to try to launch it, that we can have people who are dedicated to go to every board meeting. You don't have to be on the board, but to be there, to know what the dialogue is, to know the agenda, so that if it isn't one that works well for the community, then you can come back and try to nip it in the bud right away. And if you can't get there, have an alternate who can get there in your stead.
Sure.
But that's how these decisions are being made, and changes are being made, and curriculum is being changed in some instances because we're not at the table.
You know, I think that there's something to that, because the fact is that seems to be more or less the strategy adopted by the deeply conservative folks who are trying to rewrite history.
It is.
And cast history in a more pleasant light. And actually, there's another example that I want to get your thoughts on as well. But before we get there, I want to finish a little bit more of this reading here, just because I want to make sure that everyone knows exactly what is going on in Florida. In an email conversation, this is the New York Post still. In an email conversation with the Post, Allen stated that the 13-member working group operated with a collaborative and consensual process, and the result is a product with no single author, adding that there was no dissent. In other words, he was on a board of 13 people total, including him. They all felt the same way, and they all thought that slavery benefited Black people. So let me read a little bit more. He advised instructors to teach the whole picture during the virtual training session that he had with the instructors there, using an example of the 9 students who integrated Little Rock Central High School in 1957, as you mentioned. And as you pointed out, he pointed to the fact that some of the same Arkansas National Guard troops who blocked students from entering helped escort them inside once the force was federalized. In other words, this narrative of we want to have our cake and eat it too. We will acknowledge a little bit of us being the bad guys if we get to be the heroes on the other side of it. That is another tactic, and one that I've seen a couple of times. I want to use this Frederick Douglass example in a second, of whitewashing the narrative, or their idea of compromise. Instead of omitting it entirely, let's write it in such a way to where we're the good guys and we're not the bad guys, so that, you know, whatever, we don't have to feel ashamed about the history or acknowledge the reality of the situation. So there's something else here that came up recently. Chris Thompson and Q and I were talking, Q Ward from, Civic Cypher. We were talking about a video that came out from PragerU. Have you heard of PragerU? Okay, so PragerU is a right-wing educational enterprise. They create educational content for use in classrooms where they feel like there is a right-wing agenda, a conservative agenda. In other words, they look at traditional education like it is very left-leaning. The fact of the matter, as you and I know, is that the truth tends to have a very liberal bias to it, right? But they push back against that, and they say, well, if you're going to have the liberal truth, then we'll have a conservative lie. This is effectively what they wouldn't say it that way, but that's effectively what they're doing, right? So they came out recently with a video, a cartoon video, and the video depicts Frederick Douglass talking to some children. So I'm going to read a little bit more about that. So, so as I mentioned, he's answering the questions of two modern day children. The animated character says, "Our founding fathers knew that slavery was evil and wrong, and they knew that it would do terrible harm to the nation." And he goes on to say, "I'm certainly not okay with slavery, but the founding fathers made a compromise to achieve something great, the making of the United States. It was America that began the conversation to end it." In other words, Frederick Douglass, they're using Frederick Douglass's name to suggest that slavery existed before the United States existed. And it was necessary to achieve this great thing called the United States. And immediately after the creation of the United States, the country moved to ban slavery. In other words, a complete rewrite of the history of this country. And it allows them to say, we do talk about slavery. And it also allows them to be the heroes of slavery. In other words, they're talking out of both sides of their mouths, and both sides of the mouth out of which they are talking are lying. And that's not unlike what happened with this Little Rock, Arkansas example that's used by, let me find his name again, William Barclay Allen in Florida, saying that the same troops who blocked the students later went and helped them after the laws changed, or the command was passed down or something like that. In other words, we might be the bad guys, but we were the good guys at the end of the day. And that's how we want to be remembered. And so I think it's a little bit of the narrative and a little bit of the optics, that they're playing with here to insulate themselves from, okay, so why do Black people often live in worse circumstances and have worse outcomes and blah, blah, blah. Why is it that white people are doing better? Why is it that the jails look like this and the police are doing these things and blah, blah, blah. And when it comes time to have conversations about how do we make this right, reparations, reforms, on and on and on, it allows people who have been indoctrinated, let me use that word clearly right now, indoctrinated according to these right-wing viewpoints. It allows them to suggest to themselves and to everyone else that Black people's and other marginalized people's positions in society is the result of their own doing, nothing more, and that white supremacy is a myth, and white supremacist institutions and a white supremacist society is just a figment of Black people's and other marginalized people's imaginations. So, your response?
Well, I would dare say, if you look at the sharp contrast, and there has always been this of where we are, the advantages that we have in employment, in housing, in education, and the diluting. I mean, look at this right now with what they're trying to do with education and Black history and Black literature. As a matter of fact, they're off the charts because they just banned Shakespeare. Okay. A part of Shakespeare. I'm going to have to go back and look at that because it's unsavory. So you have a cohort of people that are very limited in scope, and they're trying to frame things just into their little world and nothing outside of that world, that autocracy that you're talking about, rather than a democracy. And so, and I'm trying to go back to your question to make sure I'm on point with that I think that it's just a matter of reframing and not looking at things the way they are.
Or cherry picking things and stringing a narrative together.
Early on in this past president's platform, his media person talked about alternate facts.
I remember that.
And we've gotten, and I'm going to share with you the theme for the Maricopa County Branch NAACP Freedom Fund dinner that you were a recipient last year. When you talk about alternate facts don't necessarily have to get you to truth. Okay.
Wow.
They don't have to get you to truth. You have to look at the fact and have the capacity to be woke and know that that fact has a number of characteristics and inconsistencies that do not lead you to anything that is truthful. You have to be able, I'm so sorry about that. You have to be able to know that. And everyone, most people first are not even dealing with it from that level. Okay, now think about it. Most people are not really, they just take the information that's fed to them and they go with it. But they're not assessing it. And that's a part of the problem. They aren't taking it, looking at it and saying, let me look at it from this perspective, that perspective, here, open it up, cut it up, look at it. Maybe test it in this situation or that situation, and then arrive at an answer from a human perspective. We've taken the humanness out of it. In slavery, if you can lynch somebody, if you can tar and feather someone, burn them, you have taken all of the human aspects out of it. You are in a completely different space. You are not a human being. You are simply not a human being. There are animals that you would be more sensitive to if you were to do that to them than you would be to another human being. Think about that. Think about that. These people walking around with their dogs and dressing them up and carrying them here and there. Just think about that. What has occurred to some human beings they would never allow to occur to a pet or perhaps any other animal? What's up with that? Who are you as an individual? What's in your heart? What's in your brain? Where's your capacity to think and to feel and to have emotions? You're dead at all levels,
So watch this. One of the things that I found, because you're not wrong. I remember putting a post up, after seeing an incident of police brutality, where the police were just, they detained someone, still up on my social media right now, if you scroll back far enough, but they detained a black man. And he's like, what is this about? I'm walking home. You know, I'm walking home. What, can you tell me what I did wrong? Mm-hmm. The guys are like, no, stay right here. Stay right here. Well, why do I have to stay here? When he's like, I'm calling for the backup to come. Mm-hmm. And then, so, you know, I wouldn't know what that means. You're calling for backup. You have me by the collar. I'm pressed against the wall. Mm-hmm. You won't tell me what I did wrong. Clearly think that you have somebody else or a person of interest and you're calling for backup. This is going to make me very nervous. Right. And he didn't run. He didn't do anything like that. But, you know, he struggled against, you know, being manhandled because that hurts. And it's intended to hurt. Right. So when you struggle or have a human reaction, anything with a nervous system will respond to stimulation, especially stimulation that feels like you're going to break my arm or whatever. Right. That then gives these people license to beat you. Right. Precisely. So it's a nervous system response that you now give these officers or whatever authority figure that whatever authority they feel they have in that moment, gives them license to beat you. Right. And they can say it was self-defense because you didn't get your arm behind your back fast enough or whatever it is that they want to say. Right. So then the video proceeds to show the officers beating and stomping and whatever this man out. And I put the same thing. I put, well, If you can imagine for a second, like, cause a lot of people, their minds go to, well, he clearly did something wrong. Why doesn't he just listen? And blah, blah, blah. Because, people have been taught.
Yeah.
We've been taught that propaganda is a real thing. I've been taught it too. I had to unlearn it. Right. And so for folks who are not Black, who live in that middle space, a lot of times we have to challenge them. And one of the ways that we can is exactly like you said. Imagine if this was not a human being. Imagine for a second this was a dog. And the police were trying to put a dog's hands behind his back, and the dog couldn't do it, or the dog was having an episode. And then the police started kicking and beating the dog and then shooting the dog. How would you feel about that? And I know what the answer is. You'd be like, why are they kicking the dog? And then ask yourself, why is it okay? Why you create excuses for the police when it's a human being, and not for when it's an animal, right?
Right. Exactly.
Now, I think that there's something very profound in that space for that people come to terms with, which again, in my belief, is coming to terms with the fact that they've become desensitized to harm done against Black and brown bodies, right? I think that there's another thing that exists in the space worth looking at, and that is how, at least insofar as the education system is concerned, what ends up happening more often than not is that conservative people create a narrative and sell it. Conservative media will say, they're very good at this. They're creating a narrative that suggests that people are being indoctrinated to become liberal in their philosophies and their voting habits, right? So they create this narrative that it's not education, it's indoctrination, right? So this is what they conjure up and they push it onto their conservative followers, right? Then the response is to create materials like the ones we're talking about today that indeed indoctrinate children with half truths and misrepresentations of facts and outright lies. Then that indoctrination, or those materials used for the source of indoctrination, is pushed out onto the masses. Now, fortunately, we're talking about Prager University and one state, which is Florida, right? They got a long way to go to really get the entire national narrative, but they are working, and we see how effective they are. But I want to say this. If they have both the narrative and that counterpunch, which is the alternative facts, almost like you mentioned, then my belief is that we all need to be aware of this strategy.
Of course.
That we are being made out to be the indoctrinators, those of us who are pushing for the truth to be told, the full truth. It is suggested that we are the ones doing the indoctrination. And so we have the narrative, we have that label, and they have the actual material. So they get to fly those indoctrination materials under the radar because the narrative is stuck with us. And so it's kind of a bait and switch sort of situation. And if we're not aware of it, then we might not be as motivated to do what you said, which is like, let's head to the school board meetings. Let's really do something about this. Let's make sure that we can at least make an impact in our own neighborhoods.
Exactly. Exactly. It's very frightening right now. Where I am, I'm very, very fearful about what I see out there. I was talking the other day, to get my hair done, you wouldn't know it, but go back. And I said, I have begun engaging in random acts of kindness.
Okay.
And I think there's something to it. I really do. I think that it can be just a moment in time where you can trigger the thought process of someone. So it may be, I'm driving the car and someone is getting ready, I'm in a shopping area, someone is getting, I stop and say,
yeah.
Now, I don't know who you are, and I'm leery of everybody these days. I must admit, I am leery. I'm leery. And if you have a flag on your car or your house or something on there, I'm leery.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
something on your shirt, there are just certain signs.
Little telltale signs.
I'm walking out of a store and I'm several steps ahead of you. And I don't have to slow my pace at all. I can keep on about my business.
Mm-hmm.
And I stop. And I hold the door. Mm-hmm. And do you know what they say? Thank you.
Yeah. And
I said, you're welcome. And I'm coming out of the casino. It's a rippling effect. Thank you. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. You have to demonstrate the kindness. You have to put some people in a space where they've never been before. Oh, may I pick that up for you? Oh, you dropped. Or, oh, you have
Let me help you out.
This is looking for ways.
Create some inroads.
Looking for ways to have interactions with people who may not ever have an interaction with you. The other day I was in the grocery store and the lady, and I could tell, she looked at me, just by her look, she probably hasn't been around a lot of Black folks. I could tell. Didn't get a chance to say anything to her, but her look was, and I could say, oh, beautiful day, isn't it? Oh, we're so lucky, anything. Random acts of kindness. We don't do that. We just as a whole, human beings, we just go about our business and we don't really interface with each other or acknowledge each other. I've been about the business of doing that.
Well, you know what? I'm going to say a couple of things. First off, I think that's fantastic. And I think that might be a step that everyone can take. Folks who maybe they cannot make it to a school board meeting. It's just not feasible for them. Put a little bit more kindness into the world. And I think that if we all think about that for a second, we realize that is who we are at our core. Mm-hmm. And that is the best fight, the noblest fight we can fight.
It is.
I suspect that it might be a little bit easier for you because you look like God.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, to me, you look like God.
Hairs, what is she going to do?
If I went to heaven and I saw God and God looked like you, I'd be like, well, I'm in the right place. But another thing is that we probably need to remain mindful of the fact that there also needs to be a little bit of strategy if and when we can apply some. Quote comes to mind, and I think that your advice really complements this quite well. I know you've historically been a strategist. In fact, you're the reason that I'm a strategist. I didn't mention that in this episode, but Dr. Westenberg is literally my teacher. So before I even,
brilliant.
Well,
you have it going on.
Well, I appreciate all the years you being my teacher and my mentor and giving me the books to read and writing the letters for me to go to school and so forth. And I know that you really do appreciate and value education, which is why it's such an honor for you to come on to the show, not just because you're incredibly insightful, but because, it's special to me. But what I wanted to suggest is that there's a quote from Malcolm X, who says that, we're not numbered. We're not outnumbered. We're out organized. And I think that points to strategy. And I think that a two-pronged approach, being strategic, because the opposition is quite strategic, as we've outlined in today's episode, looking at PragerU and looking at, the goings on in Florida. There's a strategy there. The efforts to co-opt the narrative surrounding slavery, the efforts to co-opt the verbiage that we use. indeed the effort to co-opt the American flag, now it's seen as a conservative symbol.
Mhm.
And you told me when we were meeting with Jesse Jackson, put this flag, we had little flags for our listeners'
Sure
benefit.
did.
We had little
Mhm.
flags out there. And you told me to
Sure
keep the
did.
flag and wave the flag proudly
Yeah.
because the
Okay.
flag does not belong to
It's true.
any political party. It
Exactly.
belongs to everyone, right?
Exactly.
But there has been these efforts, whether intentional or not, to kind of lean into the co-opting
Mhm.
of lots of different things. In
Mhm.
other words, strategy. Strategy on the one hand, coupled with, I think, us being who we are. And if,
Mhm.
in my view, in my estimation, Black people have been far kinder than we've really needed to be. In our history, we've been far more helpful and more empathetic and brotherly. And I believe part of that probably stems from the fact that we're an old people. We are the humans.
That's right.
And so we're kind of like the big brothers and sisters. And so we've learned a lot more lessons, maybe on a cellular level. And some of us are still learning, and some of us have learned quite a bit. You know, I look up to you in the way that I believe I've never seen anyone ever not look up to you, you know. But I love what you said about pouring a little bit more kindness into our day-to-day activities, because it's very easy for us to listen to stories like the ones we're talking about today, try to dissect them, and feel either overwhelmed by them or upset by them. And then that kind of moves into the space where we could be thinking, not only thinking strategically, but thinking in terms of how do we offset that energy. And if I'm honest, offsetting that energy is perhaps the strongest strategy of all. So I think that is something that is super profound. And
yeah, I give you two themes.
Please, before we go,
You know, they
let's knock
always
'em
ask
out.
me to create themes. This was from our Maricopa County branch Freedom Fund dinner, and I'm going to give this to you.
Okay, what is
And I
this?
want
Let's describe it.
And the theme is to marinate it. I mean, I want you to think about it. And whenever I do a theme, I want people to sort of look at it and think about it.
Okay.
And it is defining truth in our democracy.
Okay.
We are at that point.
Oof.
That is whether we're going to keep a democracy or not.
Yeah.
Whether we define the truth, accepting what is true and what is not. And I have some for you to share.
I'll take them.
And then, you know, I do the HBCU fair, the Historically Black College University Fair. And one of the things that came out of Florida was whether HBCUs are necessary, are relevant, if you will, because they are telling one aspect of history. And the theme for the HBCU Fair for 2023 is HBCUs, Pillars of History, Pathways to the Future. So if I'm going to promote the concept of HBCUs being viable, they are solid, they are strong in their knowledge about history. And if they're going to take it out of any other institution, there's one place that they're not going to take it out of. It's going to be the HBCU, because they go tell it like it is.
That way. Well, I appreciate you giving us all those two bits of information. Obviously, this is a lot to ponder. And I can't thank you enough. Of course, my hope is to have you on a little bit more frequently,
because you're messaging out there to people that I thank you all for listening. You're messaging, and that's important.
I've done my best to try to make you as proud as I can. I never went to sleep. You know what I mean? I took African American literature class when I was 19 years old, over 20 years ago, and you were my teacher, and I kept all my books. They're still downstairs at my house, and all the above. And so, anyway, I would love to thank you once again for coming up. Once again, today's guest is Dr. Camilla Westenberg, Professor Emeritus at Phoenix College and the second Vice President for Political Action of the Maricopa County branch of the NAACP, and an educator for nearly 40 years. And of course, my very own teacher. Again, thank you. And for everyone who has tuned in to this episode, let us know your thoughts. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in Florida and a lot of stuff going on with respect to the education of our children and the children that our children will grow up with. And you might agree or you might disagree, but here's the time for us to have that conversation. You can use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app, or of course, you can reach out to me on all social media at Ramses Ja, and hopefully we'll talk soon. And until we do, peace. So that was... This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show is produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. Join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice, from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.
I got one more thing I want to talk to you